Hellbound, Hellraiser 2 from 1988. This is obviously the direct sequel to 1987's Hellraiser, which I did a video on a couple years ago. And Hellraiser 2 for me is a pretty good sequel. It has flaws, big flaws, but it's so visually interesting to me that I can kind of look past them if I really want to. But that's not what I'm going to be doing here. I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the grotesque. And this movie has an abundance of all of that. But I'm not super confident in talking about this one because it's an extremely convoluted movie, especially once you get to the last 30 or 40 minutes. It's just basically nonsense. I mean, nothing really makes sense. But I still find it interesting to watch. And the vagueness and the unexplained events in the movie almost allow you to come up with your own headcanon. Not that I'm saying I've done that. Believe me, I still have no idea what's going on in this one. So maybe I'm just making excuses for the movie. Maybe it's just that all the Hellraiser sequels that came after this one are mostly pretty bad, so it looks better by comparison. I don't know. But if I'm going to do this, I might as well get started. And just fair warning, this movie is very violent, and there will be some potentially disturbing images from the movie in this video. So if this movie isn't your thing, then this video is likely not going to be your thing either. Unless you're just here to listen to my reactions to some of the insanity in this movie, in which case, enjoy. Anyway, here we go. Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, directed by Tony Randall, starring Ashley Lawrence, Claire Higgins, Kenneth Cranham, and Doug Bradley. After recapping the events of Hellraiser 1, the movie opens up with what is essentially Pinhead's origin. He's shown as a normal-looking man in a military uniform from what looks like the 1930s or 40s. He's in a strange room alone, and he solves the lament configuration much like Frank did in the first movie. But in doing so, he becomes a Cenobite, which is a bit odd when you think about it, because that is not at all what happened to Frank. He was torn apart and sent to hell. So why does Pinhead become Pinhead? It's just another one of those things in this movie that isn't really explained. And then it jumps over to Kirsty, who has just woken up. She's in a psych ward. It picks up right after the first movie, and a homicide detective wants some answers from her about what happened. Everyone seems to think she's crazy, and I probably would too if I heard her story. But what the hell happened to her boyfriend? That dude survived the first movie and just said, fuck it, I'm done. He may have been the most useless and forgettable character in horror movie history, but he might also be the smartest. He just said, I think it's best if we see other people, and then he left this franchise in the dust. And then it switches over to Kirsty's father's house, which shouldn't be here, because it was completely destroyed in the first movie. But it's here. Some cops are exploring it. They find the dead bodies that Julia was feeding to Frank. They also find the bloody mattress that Julia died on. And they want to take the mattress as evidence. I mean, honestly, the whole fucking house is evidence, but sure, let's focus on this mattress because plot. And then Kirsty is introduced to Dr. Chenard and his assistant Kyle. They are brain surgeons. Why they are evaluating Kirsty, I'll never know, but they are. And the detective leaves her under the care of Chenard for now. And she pleads with all of them to destroy the mattress, which is kind of stupid because Chenard hears this and suddenly has an interest in the mattress. He ends up pulling some strings and has the mattress delivered to his house. No idea how he managed that. I mean, maybe he has some dirt on the detective. Who knows? But in the meantime, Kirsty meets another patient named Tiffany. Kyle explains that Tiffany has been here for 6 months and she's a complete mystery. She doesn't speak. She just solves puzzles all day, which, as we know, could be very detrimental in a Hellraiser movie. Anyway, Kirsty goes to sleep and she has a vision of what she thinks is her skinless father writing a message on the wall asking for help because he's in hell. So that's disturbing. But why Kirsty assumes it's Larry, her father, I'll never know. Why would he be in hell? He didn't solve the lament configuration. He didn't even know about it. In any case, she tells Kyle the whole story and says that her father is in hell, so she wants to rescue him. And for some reason, Kyle decides to sneak into Chennard's house to investigate. I'm not clear on how Kirsty's story leads him to this. Maybe I missed something, I don't know. But it just seems very random. Although he does overhear Chennard asking the detective for the mattress. So maybe that's it. Anyway, he finds out that Chennard is obsessed with lament configurations. He has 3 of them on display. So there's more than one. How exciting. And he has to hide behind a curtain because Chennard comes home and he's not alone. He has brought one of his more disturbed patients with him. He's hallucinating that he's covered in maggots and insects, and that already sounds like a pretty hellish existence, but it's going to get worse. Because Chennard sits him down on the horrendous mattress that has been delivered to him, and he hands this guy a knife, and he starts cutting into his own skin. The blood seeps into the mattress, and a skinless Julia emerges and consumes him the same way Frank did to his victims in the first movie. And I'm not going to lie, it's fucking disgusting. The skinless people in these movies are horrid. And Julia wants help from Chennard, and he agrees. He puts her in some kind of white Miami Vice-looking suit, which is ridiculous, especially given the fact that she has no skin. I mean, this suit is ruined right off the bat. Tragic. And then he starts bandaging her up like a mummy. And you'd think he would have done this before giving her clothes. But whatever. He does things backwards. And then they start making out, which is heinous.
That's because she had no lips, but her mouth was still very much in play.
Anyway, Kyle sees all of this, and he runs back to Kirsty to tell her what he saw. He obviously believes her now. He also tells her that Chennard has puzzle boxes. Kirsty apparently wants to get a hold of one so she can go to hell to get her father back, which is crazy. And Kyle seems to agree. He says, we should think about this first. And Kirsty says, when I think, I hurt. Same. When I think about this movie, I hurt. And over at Chennard's house of horror, Julia has been consuming some of his patients. She is back to looking like Julia again, which really doesn't make any sense because Frank absorbed all those bodies from the first movie and he ended up looking just like his last victim, Larry, Kirsty's father. So why does she look like Julia? She should look like whoever she ate last. In any case, Kirsty and Kyle sneak into the house. I guess Chennard just has no locks. Anybody can just walk in at any time. And they find some lament configurations. Kirsty wants to just grab one and get out, but Kyle insists on checking out the house first. I don't know why. Seems like that is a great way to get caught. But I suppose he's worried that Chennard has victimized more patients here. And he is correct. He leaves Kirsty in Chennard's study, and he comes across a good old-fashioned murder room. Julia shows up. She seems to act as though she's also a potential victim of Chennard. Kyle seems terrified of her, and she says, come to mother, which is a nice callback to Frank's come to daddy line in the first movie. And then she kisses him and sucks him into oblivion, and not in a fun way. He's a human prune right now. And this is kind of a shocking death because it seemed like Kyle was going to be a major character throughout this movie, but he is not. Tragic. And in the study, Kirsty finds an illustration of what looks like Pinhead and a photograph of Pinhead as a human. How and why Chennard acquired these things, we'll never know. But she takes them with her and starts looking for Kyle. She calls out to him, which is just something you wouldn't do if you broke into someone's house. I would think the whole point is to not get caught, but she's not concerned at all about that. She finds the murder room, the dried up Kyle corpse, and Julia. And then we get, I think, maybe the most unintentionally hilarious moment in the movie.
They changed the rules of the fairy tale. I'm no longer just the wicked stepmother. Now I'm the evil queen. So come on. No! Take your best shot, Snow White.
I mean, what is this movie? I mean, that's just such an insane sequence of events that just happened. I don't even know where to begin. But I guess that's just how much these two hate each other. And I really don't know how Julia managed to knock Kirsty out with a backhand. That seems unlikely. I guess Kirsty just has a glass jaw. And once again, someone in a horror movie is doing Ric Flair chops. So it's pretty silly. And Channard shows up with Tiffany, of all people. And he and Julia want her to solve the lament configuration, presumably so they won't get torn apart for doing it. So they're basically sacrificing Tiffany. She solves it. The Cenobites naturally show up. The whole house transforms into a hub with various gateways into hell. And Pinhead walks in like Admiral Kirk after Savik's Kobayashi Maru test. The three secondary Cenobites are about to go to town on Tiffany, but Pinhead stops them. He says, "It's not hands that call us, it's desire." And I love that. I love that the Cenobites won't necessarily torture and kill you and take you to hell. I think you have to kind of want it in a weird subconscious way, which is extra interesting in regards to Kirsty, because they absolutely did want to take her to hell. So maybe there's a smidgen of darkness in Kirsty as well. Be really cool if the sequels would have explored that, but they do not. Anyway, Julia and Channard overhear this in secret, and they escape into the hellish corridors. And Kirsty finally wakes up. She takes the lament configuration, and she begins to traverse hell, calling out for her father. And this is where the movie gets really muddled and messy, in my opinion. It's very visually interesting and bizarre, but nothing really makes sense. It's kind of just a series of nightmarish images. Kirsty ends up meeting these Cenobites for the first time in this movie. She tries to use the puzzle box to get rid of them, but Pinhead points out that she can't send them back. They're already here, and so is she. She says she came for her father, and Pinhead says that her father is in his own hell, as is she. She runs off as Pinhead says this:
"We have no more surprises.
We've always been here.
But please, feel free. Explore. We have eternity to know your flesh.
This movie may not be as cohesive as the first one, but it still has some pretty great lines. And in the meantime, Julia and Channard meet Julia's god, the god that sent her back, the god of flesh, hunger, and desire. And it's called Leviathan. And it's essentially a giant elongated octahedron-shaped lament configuration. And it would be nice to find out a little bit more about this Leviathan, but all we really know is that it's the absolute ruler of hell. And Channard has some flashbacks indicating that he's been torturing and experimenting on people since he was just a kid. It also seems like one of his victims was Tiffany's mother. And I guess that makes him the perfect candidate to become an avatar for the Leviathan. Julia pushes him into the world's grossest phone booth, and he gets tortured and turned into a Cenobite. And then a fucked up worm with a spinning blade in its uvula attaches itself to his fucking brain. Okay, it was pretty creepy until he started making that goofy noise. And I have questions. Why Chenard? Why is he becoming a Cenobite? Why not Julia or Frank? You know, Pinhead solved the puzzle box and became a Cenobite. Frank solved it and got torn apart and sent to hell. Chenard kind of solved it through Tiffany, and he gets turned into a Cenobite. Does any of this make sense to you? Because it doesn't make sense to me. What exactly is supposed to happen when you solve a lament configuration? Do you get tortured and sent to hell? Or do you actually become a Cenobite? Because it seems to be a flip of the coin. Although I suppose the lament configuration has various outcomes, so maybe it depends on that. Who knows? But moving on. Kirsty runs into a horny morgue with all these women covered in sheets. They seem to be fapping underneath them, but when the sheet is removed, they disappear. And Frank shows up. How thrilling. Turns out he's the one that asked for help, not her father. And this is his version of hell. He is surrounded by horny ghosts that he can't have sex with. This would also be Dr. Crusher's hell. And it seems like he only wants Kirsty here so he could force himself on her, which is dark, even for this movie, especially considering that he is her uncle. But Kirsty grabs one of the sheets and throws it in the fire, and this somehow causes the entire place to go up in flames. And Frank's skin burns off. Does that make sense? What the fuck is happening right now? Why is skin so easily removable in these movies? Skin is like a pair of breakaway basketball pants that can just be ripped away at any moment. It's fucking mental. And Julia arrives. She brought Tiffany. And Julia confronts Frank for the first time since he murdered her. And she finally gets her revenge by ripping his heart out, which is very satisfying. Could not happen to a nicer guy, but again, I have questions. He's already dead. He's got no skin. Does he need his heart? I don't know. They all leave Frank's hell, and Julia suddenly gets sucked out of her own skin into some kind of weird portal. What is happening? We have another person in the span of a couple of minutes that has lost their fucking skin. Skin is just a one-piece outfit in these movies. What can I say? And I guess Julie is going back to her own personal hell, whatever that is. Maybe she's surrounded by a bunch of Franks who suffer from constant erectile dysfunction and can only perform chinnilingus. Who knows? And the movie gets even weirder, as unfathomable as that is, because Cenobite Chenard chases Kirsty and Tiffany through this labyrinth. Weird worms with eyes and fingers on them emerge from his tentacles. I mean, it's mad. Kirsty and Tiffany run into the Cenobites once again, and Kirsty shows Pinhead the picture of him when he was a human. He doesn't remember, but all the Cenobites were human ones, and it seems to trigger a memory of his former life. And just as that happens, Chenard appears, and the Cenobites decide to stand against him. They really are angels to some and demons to others. But this fight doesn't last too long. Chenard makes quick work of them all, which is just so disappointing. I mean, at this point, this movie is so wacky that a knockdown, drag-out fight between Pinhead and Chenard would have been totally justified. But it sadly doesn't happen. Chenard kills them one by one, and they all turn back into their human form, and we see that the Chatterer Cenobite was just a boy, which I think is unwarranted, and Pinhead gets to die as a human. So it's sort of a nice resolution for him, although I think it could have been handled a lot better. I mean, it's essentially the Darth Vader character arc, all within the span of 25 seconds. In any case, Tiffany runs back to Julia's leftover pile of skin and picks up the lament configuration, which has now turned into a spike resembling the Leviathan structure. Channard tracks them down and says, "You have your whole lives behind you now," which is another great line. And it seems like he's going to kill Tiffany before she can reconfigure the box, but then Julia shows up. And she distracts Channard long enough for Tiffany to activate the puzzle. And this somehow causes Channard's head to get ripped off, and Tiffany is suddenly hanging off the edge of a cliff. Julia pulls her up and reveals that it's actually Kirsty wearing Julia's skin. What the fuck, man? This movie is mayor of Silly Town. And they use the puzzle to seemingly destroy the Leviathan and escape back into the real world. They're safe and sound. And the movie ends with some movers clearing out Channard's house, and a spinning wooden pillar shoots out of Julia's mattress, and it's covered in the various faces still stuck in hell. And the homeless man from the first movie who eats crickets says, "What's your pleasure, sir?" The end. I mean, holy shit. Nothing makes sense. And this thing will be explained a little bit more in Hellraiser 3, but not particularly well. These movies just don't really obey any rules. And I both love and hate that about it. As Frank says in the first movie in regards to the lament configuration, it's pleasure and pain indivisible. And that's kind of the experience I have watching these movies. But overall, I think it is a pretty decent sequel to Hellraiser. It's not perfect. It's kind of all over the place. And I think it could have benefited from a little bit more time. It came out only a year after the first movie, and I think with another year or two, they might have been able to develop something a little bit more cohesive. You know, we never really know what happened to Kirsty's dad. I mean, Pinhead says he's in his own hell. What does that mean? Does that mean he wasn't in that particular dimension? Was he in biblical hell? Was he in heaven? Who knows? And Kirsty ceases asking those questions, which I guess is probably for the best. But there are some good things about it. Visually, it's very disturbing. It does not hold back. When Julia first emerges from the mattress, it is horrific. And I think it may be even more disturbing than anything in the first movie. And Julia herself is a much better villain in this movie. You know, she's no longer just doing evil things for good dick. But at the same time, she is still in the service of something else. Instead of Frank, it's this Leviathan. Dr. Channard is kind of a letdown, at least until he becomes a Cenobite. He's just kind of boring until that point. The most interesting thing he does is kiss a lady who has no skin. Yikes. And we do get a little bit of backstory on Pinhead, but we also really don't. You get a little bit more in the next couple movies, but what do we really see in this one? That he was a decent guy decades ago, solves the lament configuration, and becomes a Cenobite. That's all we know. And maybe we shouldn't know all that much about him. I'm surprised he's only been a Cenobite for a few decades. He just seems like an eternal character. And if you're going to do his origin, I would go back as far as possible. Like maybe he was a 13th century Templar knight who solves the lament configuration. I don't know. To me, that just makes it a little bit more haunting. But anyway, I should probably wrap this up. If you're one of the weirdos like me that likes the first movie, let me know what you think of this one. And until next time, take it easy.
So come on. No! Take your best shot, Snow White.